Continuing on this third house theme, what's worse about it is that some may unwillingly turn to charlatans during this transit, false messiahs, and people who dazzle with pretty words, saying all sorts of things that are designed to get you excited about what it is that they're pushing. All right, so these people have well, let me just put it this way. With this transit here, it's a strong possibility that they are not all they're cracked up to be. All right. Now, this is also an easy time to be deceived by con artists, by people, by beggars on the street, even by friends who come with a sob story, designed to get you to sympathize with them, and they take advantage of you. All right. Also, avoid taking unnecessary risks at this time. There's a blind spot generated by optimism that will cause you to lead yourself astray. Okay. Now, check on gullible elders, because they too can be targets of con artists during this period. They could fall victim to someone preying on something they believe, or even a health concern, selling them some device based on some survey they may have taken eons ago that they don't even remember, and they take advantage. So be sure to know what's going on with your elderly parents and grandparents. This is a time when business practices can set you up for ruin. So with that said, reject calls from collectors, debt collectors. Reject those calls. Do not engage with debt collectors during this period, because you could very easily be taken for a ride. Not only debt collectors, but inbound phone salespersons. Avoid falling for those sale tactics. On a lighter note, during this cycle, particularly during the full moon, you might feel dreamy, sleepy, and tired. And feeling that way during a full moon is not uncommon. Okay, the same holds true for a quarter moon. You can feel those same things during a quarter moon. All right. This is not a period to make life-changing decisions, because you're just not seeing things clearly. You might be vibrating on a measure of doubt or fear, very Neptunian in nature. So do your very best not to make a life-changing decision. This is a period when logical thinking is very difficult to come by. All right. Furthermore, check on those who struggle with substances, alcohol or strong drugs beyond marijuana. Check on those people as well. This transit with with Jupiter square Neptune can cause people to fall back on those bad habits. Okay. On the world stage, we could hear about a health epidemic. The square to Mars suggests infectious disease. I spoke on this a little earlier. I'll come back on it now. This has been brewing for most of the year. We've seen all sorts of diseases this year. We've seen the Legionnaire's disease in Georgia, dengue fever in Florida. Reports of both salmonella and hepatitis A have been going around. We could hear about another epidemic of some sort happening during this full moon phase. Now, prior to the full moon, I believe it was last Tuesday or Wednesday, this past Tuesday or Wednesday, that in New York City, they declared the measles epidemic over. Measles have been going on since the beginning of the astrological year, that is the Aries ingress. And there have been several outbreaks of measles across the nation. Well, New York City, or the state of New York, has declared their emergency over, but there could still be an outbreak someplace, somewhere in the United States, or possibly even the world. Furthermore, we could hear of health issues related to the liver, related to the lungs, or an outbreak of an STD. We are already seeing evidence of the lung issues with the vaping crisis. I spoke on that earlier. I won't go back into it, but we could see that reach a peak. And any liver issues, which is a Jupiterian thing, any liver issues may be related to pharmaceutical drugs, Neptune. All right, so let's stand by for that. There could also be an outbreak that is contained within a hospital, a prison, a nursing home, or an orphanage. So let's keep our ears and eyes open for those stories as well. Also, with this square, with Jupiter in a square to the Sun Mars conjunction, there may be there's a possibility of a member of the clergy or a prominent doctor transitioning or expiring, dying, perhaps of a heart-related issue, perhaps a blood-related issue. But we could hear of a doctor or a clergy member, or even a member of a major university or a high-ranking member of any sort of university expiring during this cycle. Okay, some charitable organization may announce bad news in the near future. Finally, this transit can produce bad news for religious organizations in general. The Catholic Church has been under fire for the last couple of years, and it would surprise nobody if they are in the news again. This time, though, it could be a religious organization, a college, or a religious college that comes under fire for fraudulent activities such as misappropriation of funds or some sort of conflict of interest between whatever the faith is and politics. It could be some religious right organization getting involved in some political thing and it being a big story because of the conflict of interest that is involved there. But because Mars is involved, it could be some sort of scandal, which would surprise no one, that is sexually related, and the perpetrator is a high-ranking member of a church organization or a college. That would not surprise me one bit. On to the seventh house. Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node are transiting the seventh house. And Saturn here suggests relationships on a personal level could turn to the better or it could turn to the worse. Just don't know how that might play out. Saturn here puts the focus on close personal relationships, and sometimes professional relationships are also indicated, and a parent. This could relate to the disciplinarian parent. It could be mom or dad. You know, in today's society, it could certainly be mom or dad. All right. This could also represent, Saturn could also represent an authority on the job. So there's a likelihood in some way that relationships take a serious turn during this transit. On one hand, partners in a relationship could take a step back and reassess the direction of the relationship. This taking a step back isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be a situation where two people have been hanging out, spending time with one another over the course of the last 2 or 3 months. And in the most recent times, perhaps this past week, they had a really pleasant time together. And they take a step back to see, do I really like this guy? Do I really like this woman? Is it possible that we could, make something of a relationship? Now, if this is you, that does not mean this is the time to go forward and try to make a relationship happen. This is only the time to assess whether or not this person is someone who could bring a measure of security and stability into your life. This applies to both men and women. Women can bring stability in a man's life just as a man can bring stability into a woman's life. Women can provide a measure of security for a man, just as a man can provide security for a woman, just not in the same way. All right? So, if this is you, this is only a time to consider it. All right? We got a Venus Saturn square coming up, and then at the end of the year, a Venus Saturn conjunction coming up. This transit is a relationship regulator. If the relationship is one that can be healthy, then you'll move forward. If it's unhealthy, then you'll part ways. All right? So I'm not going to bang that into the ground right now. We'll see how things work out. Sometime after the third quarter moon, I believe it's on the same day of the third quarter moon, Venus and Saturn will square. So there may be an opportunity here coming up inside the next week where you could have that conversation. It's just not during this full moon, okay? Furthermore, this could also apply to professional relationships. Are you happy on your job? Well, if you're not, this is the time to really consider what you're going to do. Are you happy on the job? Then in the not too distant future, there may be an opportunity for you to ask for a raise or seek out a promotion. Okay? During this transit of Saturn in the seventh house, loyalties may be questioned. All right? If your loyalties are called to the table, stand up and be accounted. All right? Conversely, Saturn here can stabilize and support relationships. This does not mean that relationships have to end with Saturn here. They can end, but they don't have to end. Some relationship partners could find themselves on the outs. All right, this is an ideal time to go visit your grandparent, your grandfather, grandmother, or your dad. You know, go say hi to dad. You've moved out recently and you ain't spent time with your father. You know, sons, it's football season. If your dad is a football fan, go hang out with him and watch a game, or take him to a sports bar and watch your favorite team. You know, this is an ideal time for bonding with fathers. All right, with Saturn in the seventh house. Also, if you need some advice for a life-altering decision that you are faced with, now is the time to seek out someone who's more mature, who's older, who has more experience, who can guide you with some time-honored experience. Saturn here denotes a serious decision forthcoming, okay? So this is a good time to go talk to somebody. On the world stage, Saturn in the seventh house does not favor harmony with other nation states. On September 11th, just a few days ago, we saw, or maybe you didn't know this, but on the day of the worst, one of the worst tragedies in United States history, one of the worst terrorist attacks on, it's not the worst. We can go back nearly 100 years to find others that were far worse. We're talking about the Black Wall Street in Wichita, but the knocking down of the towers, you know, that was a really, really bad thing in our lifetime. Very few people are alive, if any, are alive when the thing took place in Wichita. But in our lifetimes, 9/11 was really, really bad. And on that day, when people in the United States are memorializing the 18th anniversary of that tragedy, in Afghanistan, rockets were fired at the embassy in Kabul, at the U.S. embassy. All right? So that's just one thing. Also, Kim Jong-un fired off more rockets, more missiles on 9/11. Nation states, this is not a good time for the United States on that level as it relates to foreign policies. So we might see Iran act a fool. We might see some other enemy of the United States government show its ass on some level in this next 2 weeks. Let's stand by and see what happens. Now, while Mercury and Venus during this lunation favors positive news in the trade war, Saturn here in the seventh house can further depress trade. So we might see more of the same stuff we've been seeing since this trade war kicked off. Good news followed by bad news. Good news followed by bad news. All right, so let's stand by and see what happens. Furthermore, Saturn here points to bad news in the world financial markets, which could signal the start of a global recession. Economists predicted that there's going to be a major recession in the next 18 months. Astrology concurs. I expect the same thing inside the first quarter, or perhaps early portion of the second quarter of 2020. There's a major alignment occurring in sidereal Capricorn in the early part in April of 2020. That's when Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all align in Capricorn. This could be pivotal in terms of the U.S. economy and perhaps even the world economy. Let's see what happens. All right, with this transit of Saturn in trine to the Mars and Saturn conjunction, it is very easy to assume that because it's a trine, that the events that could play out will be positive. However, in my practice and in my observation, when malefic planets align, malefic things just naturally happen. Malefic planets align and they generally behave badly on some level. All right. So on a positive note, Mars and Saturn in a trine does favor success for law enforcement, for the military, for first responders, and emergency workers. Okay. So we will see the police do some good things. We will see firemen and paramedics do some wonderful things. We will see tow truck drivers and people who are the first responders in major tragedies, like those who volunteer during hurricanes and floods. And we'll see those people do some amazing things. However, it's very possible with Mars and Saturn in a square. I'm sorry, with Mars and Saturn in a trine, and the energies, the malefic energies between those two flowing very easily, we could see police behave badly. Back to the positive thing. Last month, when this transit was forming, we learned that law enforcement had thwarted up to 6 domestic terrorists following the episodes in El Paso and in Dayton. And they could have thwarted that second one in Texas at the end of the month had they been diligent. However, they can't stop everything, and some things are meant to happen. Mars on the ascendant in the full moon in August and in the new moon at the end of August indicated a mass shooting. So the fact that that one happened is not a surprise. Okay. We also saw in August with this trine, first responders rescuing children from house fires. There were 4 children under the age of 4 in the Midwest who were rescued from a second-story apartment building that was ablaze. They should not have. These children should have died. The blaze was so bad, these children should have died. But the amazing work of those first responders, the firemen in particular, saved those children's lives. There were also people trapped. There were heavy rains in the Midwest and in the South in August, and there were people trapped by the flood waters, and first responders rescued those folks. So we could see more of that stuff. There might be some of that going on as I speak somewhere in the United States, particularly with the hurricane surge moving along the Gulf, through the Gulf. Okay, so we could see more of that in a continued theme along those lines would not surprise me over the next couple of weeks. On the flip side, with Saturn and Mars in this square, or in this trine, it may as well be a square because Mars and Saturn, whenever they come together, it's like a square in opposition. Bad things can happen. This particular transit, though, speaks to the president losing some popularity. Now, again, I spoke on this earlier, but here it is indicated a second time in this lunation. It would not surprise anybody that he pisses somebody off with something he says or something he does. However, one of his closest confidants could decide to part ways. We saw John Bolton get fired / resign. You know, one says he was fired, the other one says I resign. Whatever the case, it's a good thing that Bolton is gone because Bolton is a war hawk and Bolton wanted war in Afghanistan, and the people of the United States are tired of war. War has been raging since 2004 on some level. And most of my life, I was born in 68 during Vietnam. War has been going on most of my life. I can remember in 94, Clinton saying something like, "We have the first time in peace in 30 years," or some shit like that. You know, where there was no war. There was a short period in the 90s where there was no war going on, where the United States was not engaged in war. And then shortly after that, Bosnia Herzegovina jumped off, and NATO went in, led by the United States. So we were still at war then. Bolton is gone. Perhaps war is going to be gone as well. All right. Other possibilities with this trine is an assassination or the death of a prominent world figure. While this transit was forming, we saw the death of Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Now, he was an elected official. He was an elected president. However, how do you win an election with 90% of the vote routinely? That man was a king if nobody else was a king. And this transit indicates the death of a prominent world figure. It could be a president, it could be a monarch, it could be a dictator. It doesn't matter. One of those types could lose their life on some level during this transit. Lastly, and I really hope this does not happen, but with that rocket strike in Afghanistan, the United States could respond and the military make a terrible mistake and kill a bunch of innocent people, igniting anger across the world. That could happen during this transit. Let's hope that does not happen, but it could. I hope that Mars and Saturn behaves until they actually get into a square, when we can be prepared for this tragic thing. Mars will be entering Virgo later in the month, and sometime in October, Mars will form a square with Saturn. That is a time when we could really see some ugly things jump off. So a lot of these tragedies that I'm speaking on during this square may not play out until October. Okay, so this is a time when we can become aware of these particular things. All right, we're almost done here. The ninth house. The ninth house has the moon and Neptune there, but they are both besieged by Saturn and by the Sun and Mars, and this can be a challenging full moon cycle on some level. On the positive side, the moon conjunct Neptune can heighten your intuitive faculties, your psychic faculties, and heighten our sensitivities. For some people, they'll experience restlessness Friday night and Saturday night. Perhaps insomnia may set in, or you awaken at 2, 3, or 4 o'clock in the morning for seemingly no reason. It's just part of the transit. Also during this transit, insecurities can be heightened. You know, you can your natural insecurities, particularly if you have strong mutable energies. Your insecurities can be heightened during this cycle, and you may experience a measure of anxiety or mild depression during this cycle, or even mood swings, up and down mood swings. Okay, some people may feel may struggle with and feel guilt from something they did in the past. All right. Now is not the time for a confession. Why? Because Mars is opposing the moon, and the person to whom you confess to, boom, they could blow their stack, and this thing may not play out the way you see it. So if you want to confess to something that you've done, hold it in, forgive yourself, write it down. Write it down just to get it out. But do not go to the person that you may have offended, because it may not play out to you. You know, it may not play out the way you feel it, the way you think it will. Okay. Furthermore, there could be some who may struggle with something that they believe. There could be a philosophical belief. There could be a philosophical difference also between men and women in relationships under this transit. All right. Men could become overly dramatic, and women icy cold in their expression of anger. And if men, if you are dealing with a woman and you get dramatic during this cycle and she goes icy cold, brother, you might have a problem.